carbon trading since 2005, and in those days I was on EU ETS, and more latterly I've been working full-time on the carbon reduction commitments. I'm very conscious, given the presentation today, it was billed, I'm going to go through everything you need to know about CRC. Frankly, it will be impossible in a 30-minute slot, plus questions. So I'm going to be touching on aspects of the scheme. Some of the slides will be familiar. If anybody has attended a previous CRC event, well, you'll see some same slides that we've shown previously. The reason why I'm saying this is that the government is shortly going to publish its response to the draft order consultation, and so with that there will be a number of policy changes. So when I present today, be careful on what's presented. There will be some changes made. So I'll try and point you to some areas, but I can't share details until the response is published, and I believe it will be published shortly. Start off. So in terms of the timeline for implementation of the CRC, this is a slide which has been previously published. In terms of the qualification period, well, it's already passed. Strictly speaking, CRC has already started. In terms of the regulations, they're due to be in force by 1st of April 2010. In terms of the actions leading up to the scheme going live, the EA had planned to issue what we were referring to as qualification packs in September. We've had to put that back because we're coordinating, in terms of what we do on comms and guidance with the government response. So once we've got the government response, then things will be updated and we'll get that out in the public domain as soon as possible. So in terms of the tranche of guidance, we're aiming for towards the end of October to get guidance documents out to help with people to understand how to determine your organisational structure, how to assess qualification, and to take you through a step-by-step process in terms of registration. And then towards the end of the year, further guidance will be published in terms of to take you through a step-by-step guide in terms of reporting, whether it's an annual report, a footprint report, and with that there will be supplementary guidance in, for example, on estimation techniques. So again, this is another slide we've previously presented. So the CRC, it places obligations on UK parent organisations. So that means that all the UK undertakings will come under the parent organisation. With that, in terms of, for the public sector, the parent organisation will be determined using the Companies Act test. The public sector, that is where a public body has a distinct legal entity, and I understand with that there's in the Freedom of Information Act there's a list of public bodies in there, and so my understanding is that will be referenced in the regulations. So participants and principal subsidiaries, well, there are going to be rules around that in terms of what's being referred to as designated changes. These are rules designed to maintain scheme coverage and ensure fairness. So this is where you've got a churn in a given organisation. It could be as a result of a sale, merger, takeover, and it's what are the rules around that. So in terms of the policy design or the scheme design, it's not about tracking individual site changes, but where it involves an entity which will qualify for the carbon reduction in its own right, then there will be rules around how that is handled. If ownership transfers from company A to company B, then with that, as a consequence, there will be changes to the baseline, which impacts on the revenue recycling calculations. So, you know, the rules around that are explained in the deck user guide. If you've not seen that, then, you know, that is a document I recommend. And again, you know, on something like this, there will be change, you know, my understanding is there will be some changes made on this. So it's where we're planning to issue guidance on designated changes towards the end of the year. And with that, we'll back that up with case studies as well to help you understand what's required. So information required for the registration process will include details of the parent organisation and the principal subsidiaries. And that will include nested subsidiaries. So if you look at the diagram, a nested subsidiary is, say, B4 is going to be designated a principal subsidiary, but within the structure under B4 is D1 and D4. So those are examples of nested principal subsidiaries. So this slide just takes you through key decisions and the assessment of qualification. The flow chart, you know, takes you through, are you the highest parent organisation? Within that, there is a commitment from government. They are mandating central government departments to be participants, irrespective of the half-hourly metered electricity usage. So the test for everybody else is, does your organisation have a half-hourly meter settled on the half-hourly market? That's the first criterion. If you've got that, it means you've got an obligation under the scheme, whether it means you've got to register as a participant or you need to make an information disclosure. So going on to, do you consume more than 6,000 megawatts through all your half-hourly meters? That's then like a broader definition. It's including, for example, pseudo half-hourly metering, voluntary automated meter readings. So again, you've got to look at the definition of meters around when you actually assess qualification. It is much broader than just looking at meters settled on the half-hourly market. Now, once you get to that point, you've got this threshold, and that's where if you have to make an information disclosure, then that means all we're looking for is confirmation, okay, what are your half-hourly meters? And that's to help us with reconciliation of all UK half-hourly meters. We need to do that to ensure that the scheme is robust. Secondly, we're looking for organisations who, you know, they estimate the half-hourly metered electricity use in the range, say 3,000 megawatt hours to 6,000. Well, we are looking for a figure, your energy usage figure, to be confirmed. The reason for that is DEC will be reviewing the coverage of the scheme, and there is this possibility that at some future point it could be extended. My understanding is there's no desire to extend it for phase 2, but nevertheless it's one of the aspects of the scheme which will be kept under review. If you ascertain that your electricity use is below 3,000 megawatt hours, then all that is required is, yes, we still need to know your half-hourly meters, but all we're looking for then is just a simple tick box declaration that your energy use is below 3,000 megawatt hours. One of the policy areas which was under review as a result of the draft order consultation is this thing of the counterparty to the energy supply contract. So I can't say any more, but you know, that is one of the areas which will be amended in the forthcoming government announcement. So in terms of qualification and assessing new emissions coverage, there are exclusions, and that is where it involves onward supply and storage, transport, or whether it's electricity imported for generation purposes. There are also exemptions from the CRC. In particular, I want to draw your attention to CCAs. The CRC is not designed to sort of double count emissions, but any emissions which are covered by CCAs, climate change agreements, will not be required to be monitored and reported during the CRC, other than there is a requirement to determine your carbon footprint, which there's certain rules around. This is a slide which depicts a staged assessment, which I'll be coming to. And within that, you do have this possibility, depending on your organisational structure, that if you've got a group member who's covered by a CCA, or that group member and all its emissions can be exempted from CRC, provided it can demonstrate that at least, greater than 25% of the emissions are covered by a climate change agreement. If you can demonstrate, again, depending on the structure of your company, that you might be like a single entity. So, you've got a CCA agreement, it's more than 25%, so that means it exempts the whole organisation from the CRC. Where you've got a case where, I don't know, it could be some sort of holding company, you've got say all your subsidiaries got CCAs, that particular holding company has got this like residual energy consumption. Well, again, that is provided for in the scheme design, where you've got this so-called residual CCA exemption rule. So providing you can demonstrate that having exempted your group members exempted from CRC, on what's left, if you can demonstrate it's less than 1,000 megawatt hours, then what's left can also be exempted from CRC. So the message, the key to this scheme is getting good quality data, and because you'll need it in terms of going through your assessment in assessing your qualification and what could be exempted from the scheme. Okay, in terms of qualification, well, what's the impact of that? Well, as a participant, you'll be subject to registration and subsistence fees, and it means full compliance. All these sort of monitoring and reporting obligations you will have to fulfil. If you're an exempt participant, well, that's where, for example, like a single entity or a residual exemption, then we are still requiring those to be registered, and then you apply for your exemption. So we're looking for a registration fee, but there will be no subsistence fees to follow. And in terms of a CCA, this is where to demonstrate your CCA coverage in relation to the rest of your energy use. There is this policy requirement, as stated prior to for the consultation, footprint report will be required. For information declaration, there will be no fees charged. We're just looking for people to log on and to make the declaration of what meters they hold and their energy use. So, in terms of the IT build, it's in progress. Go live is now scheduled for March 2010. We've had to put that back from January, and one of the reasons is we're factoring in some of the changes being made. The trading functionality, we're aiming to add that mid next year. What you've got on this slide is just an example screenshot from the registration screens. And for registration, we're looking for organisational information. And the registry IT is designed to utilise company's house information as appropriate to pre-populate fields in the registration process. obviously there's a limitation, but where there is information available, we've tried to tap into that. It's been more difficult for us in terms of the public sector. But on the back of what needs to be registered, we're obviously looking for contact information, the organisational structure, we're looking for that to be described. So this is where we're not looking for you to provide details of every single company that you own, but what we're looking for you to do is to highlight the parent organisation and the so-called principal subsidiaries. Okay? So with that, we're then looking for you to upload your meter details, to confirm your consumption, and of course, a payment. You're not registered officially until you pay. So again, this is just another screenshot for emission reporting. There will be, in these sort of guidance products, there will be guidance to explain core data, which is certain types of gas and electricity meters, but also where you need to establish your emissions coverage to be at least 90% regulated by a climate change policy. Then you do have the scope to choose what residual sources you declare to be monitored and reported within the scheme. This is the so-called 90% rule. And also there will be guidance around what constitutes an actual and an estimated reading. The significance of estimated is that's where a 10% uplift will be applied to those readings. And the reason for that is to drive people down to better energy management. It's where you can upgrade and to get automatic meters installed. Then the drive is to encourage that. There will be provisions for taking your own readings of the meters, providing that you've got adequate records to back that up. So part of the annual reporting will be performance is measured by a number of metrics. You've got the early action metric. I'm not proposing to go into that now. If you want me to explain that in the Q&A, I'm quite happy to. But there's three metrics: early action, the absolute emissions metric, and the growth metric. And so the early action metric, that will only be used to assess performance during phase one. Once phase one is complete, then performance thereafter will only be assessed using the absolute emissions metric and the growth metric. So going back to say year one, there is no effort to sort of collect baseline data. Year one of the CRC will be the baseline. So for year one, in terms of assessing performance and the subsequent league table, year one performance will be entirely judged on the early action metric. Thereafter, for year two, then we will have the absolute metric, the growth metric, and the early action metric. And in terms of assessing performance, these metrics are also weighted. Again, if you want to question me on that, I can do that in the Q&A. So once we get to the cap phase, we will be auctioning allowances in April 2013. That is something, in terms of the scope of the projects I'm dealing with at the moment, that is something which is currently out of scope. That has been deliberately a policy from DEC to put it on the back burner because they wanted to learn the lessons from EU ETS auctioning. So that's something which we will work towards for implementation for 2013. In terms of the this schematic, there's actually quite a lot of information here. It's extracted from the debt user guide, and what it depicts is like the staged assessment that you need to go through to determine the CRC emissions, which will be required to be monitored and reported within CRC. So, there is this reference there to the 90% rule, where, you've got this flexibility over residual sources. And, I welcome that in terms of it's meant to sort of reduce the administrative burden, where it, each organisation has got to decide, what makes sense to you in terms of what you commit to report on an annual basis. Within the Environment Agency, I don't know what the decision's going to be for the team responsible for participation. Won't surprise me, there'll be a grand debate saying, oh, we want to declare everything within the CRC. But, at the end of the day, it's like this de minimis thing, for what effort you need to sort of track down and commit to on an annual basis all the minor sources and, miscellaneous use of fuels. So where it doesn't make administrative sense to do that, then you've got this opportunity to say, well, for those particular fuel sources, I think apart from assessing it for the footprint report, you can disregard those miscellaneous sources for the rest of the phase, providing you can demonstrate at least 90% of your emissions are covered by some sort of climate change policy measure. And that is obviously CRC, the EU emissions trading scheme and climate change agreements. So trading of allowances, for the introductory phase, we've got it's a 3-year phase in which the allowances will be available at a fixed price of £12 per tonne. The first sale is scheduled for April 2011. The cap phase, we've got this full auctioning. The auction design is going to be sealed bid uniform price. Where to buy allowances? In terms of the secondary market, well, we're designing the registry to record all transfers of allowances from allocation to transfers between trading accounts. In order to facilitate trading of allowances to match buyers and sellers, the registry has been designed to have a notice board where for your buyer you can place, I want allowances, here I am, and how many allowances you want. Likewise, if you're selling, you'll be able to put a notice on the registry. They will be time limited. I think the current business rules around that is we're looking at something like 30 days where you'll have an opportunity to refresh those notices or they'll just lapse. The safety valve, this is where there is, if you can't source sufficient allowances from the secondary market and certainly at the right price, then you do have this opportunity to buy additional allowances from the so-called safety valve, which is a buy-only link to the EU ETS market. So this is something which will be administered by the Environment Agency, and it's where we'll be looking on a monthly cycle for the bids or the request for additional allowances will be built up. Then we'll go through a broker to buy those allowances, and then we've designed a process to allocate those allowances to the relevant accounts as and when the payments have been fully reconciled. In terms of trading, there is reference to unlimited banking, but with that, all allowances from the introductory phase will be cancelled at the end of that phase. The reason is because they have been sold as unlimited, and it's debt policy that they've judged that it would be inappropriate to trade those allowances once you've got a full market mechanism in place for the cap phase. Okay, this is a slide which I've copied from a guest presentation which was given at a EA CRC regional workshop earlier this year. It's from the Local Government Information Unit. They give a presentation on lessons learned from Council's carbon trading. And one of the messages that was put during Andy Johnson's presentation was that what you've got here is a slide which depicts the benefits of using a MAC curve, and that is, marginal abatement cost curve, and it will help you to select cost-effective projects. Andy, he's told me that particularly in the public sector, they're just not used to thinking that way. It's just all about, well, do we have a budget? What can we spend it on? Or is there a grant available? And with a trading scheme, it is something which each organisation, to get the best out of the scheme, you're really going to have to think where it makes sense for you to invest money. And in that, you will have to factor the cost of that abatement. So longer term, this is something which each and every organisation will have to get to grips with. So the phrase used at the presentation earlier this year was learn to embrace these MAC curves. Other sort of learning points which came out of these pilot studies, and for example, I think the LGIU have been involved with Carbon Action Yorkshire, and one of the, some of the key things which have come out of these pilot studies is like you need to form a multidisciplinary team. Longer term, once you get into sort of thinking about your bid for auctioning, well, you need, definition of an auction is there's going to be winners and losers. You need to think about, your bid schedule, what price you are prepared to pay, and to factor that into your carbon management plan. Because, at the end of the day, if you don't get your bid right, you could end up with insufficient allowances, and then you're at the mercy of the secondary market or buying by the safety valve. So the other challenge for me, certainly in the setup of the scheme, is to establish how good your data is. Particularly for diverse organisations, that is where there's a significant administrative challenge. And then, longer term, you do need to sort of clarify your strategy on how you're going to trade in this scheme. I suspect at the start there will be a lot of people who position themselves as, in essence, just buy and comply. But to make this work and to get the best out of a trading scheme, then if it's going to work well, it does truly mean that you'll get emission reductions at least cost. And then as and when the price of carbon goes up, well, then that brings into play other techniques. And, it might make sense for some organisations and not another, but at least overall, there's this steady incremental ratcheting down of emissions in the sector. Okay, this table is extracted from the DEC user guide. It sets out how revenue recycling payment is calculated. And when you look at the figures, it's not particularly intuitive how they're arrived at. I can remember the first time I looked at the table. But there's two key aspects to determining the revenue recycling. Is that your performance is assessed using the so-called performance metrics. With those metrics, you will get a score. It's that score which then places you in the league table. Depending on that score is where you are positioned. Now, in terms of the revenue recycling payment, there is like a bonus penalty factor applied to your revenue recycling payment. So your position in the league table, if you're the very best, let's say in year one, then that's where you'll get a bonus factor of 10% applied to your revenue recycling payments. If you're the worst, it'll be a 10% penalty. Now, in terms of the figure which is used to calculate your revenue recycling payment is always based on the first year of emissions. So the best way to describe that is if you've got you're an organisation which accounts for 10% of emissions in year one, then that is your share of the revenue recycling pot. So that is your 10%, which is going to be used as the basis for each future year. And so that 10%, you then apply the bonus penalty factor to your 10% share of the revenue recycling pot. Okay. Now, this I understand as being reflects the result of modelling work by DEC economists, and with it, it's meant to, for example, to provide incentives even in an uncapped phase to reduce your emissions. So, in addition to whatever you're going to save on reducing your energy use, you stand to qualify for a bonus within the scheme, providing that your performance is above average relative to other participants. Now, this next slide, again, it's copied from a guest speaker presentation. It was a guy from KPMG, and all it's just trying to depict is that there is this uncertainty in the revenue recycling payment. Even if you reduce your emissions, you're not absolutely guaranteed that you will get a bonus, because your performance is going to be judged relative to everybody else. So, that's one thing to bear in mind. And like, one of my suspicions is, in the early years, we're going to get over delivery. Wherever the targets are agreed to, from what I understand of Carbon Action Yorkshire, in year one of the pilot scheme, the average saving from participants was 5%. Now, I know the targets for CRC are due to be revisited. What's been quoted is an 8% reduction by 2020, but I believe all the carbon targets for each part of the sector being reviewed in the light of the decisions on the Climate Change Act. But as I say, the Carbon Action Yorkshire pilot scheme, just people just looking at what their consumption was, what opportunities to improve energy management. Year one, a 5% average saving across the board. So it does demonstrate there is some easy hits out there, and so you do have to start thinking about there are some uncertainties around how you're going to perform in the scheme. Once we get to year two and we've got the absolute energy emission data coming into play, then you'll have a good idea where you are. Longer term, once you're in the cap phase, then a good rule of thumb is whatever the incremental target is for a given year, then by definition, in theory, that's going to be the average performance across the sector. So if you achieve there or thereabouts in the percentage reduction, you should by definition be about midpoint. But as I say, I can't guarantee that, because in the early years, I suspect the great majority will actually make some considerable savings. Okay, I'm running over slightly, so I'll just skip through the following slides. On compliance, we've got a range of audits planned. Registration audits will focus on, have you sort of registered your entire organisation? It'll be one of our initial checks. Annual compliance auditing, this is something which will be a rolling programme of audits. We're aiming to audit up to 20% of participants. So the aim is over at least a 5-year period, we should have been able to audit all participants. In terms of reference to flexible evidence packs, this is where we're not looking to get van loads of evidence pack delivered to Environment Agency offices. We are looking for to kick off a so-called desk-based assessment using a summary evidence pack, and then there'll be aspects of that we may want to drill down into more detail. So we're not looking to sort of review all evidence packs. An audit is using a sample of data, and that's where you know, we'll kick it off with a desk-based audit, but it could lead on to a much more detailed audit, including, as required, site visits. We're also proposing to use a risk-based methodology, and that's where, obviously, if somebody's missed on annual report, well, you know, we'd be wanting to audit and be questioning, well, what management systems have you got in place? There will be, you know, enforcement action as a result of that anyway. So in terms of enforcement, well, we've got a range of civil penalties to act as an appropriate deterrent for a relatively light self-certification scheme. So, you know, they're all designed to address potential financial benefits for misreporting. There will be penalties for failing deadlines, not giving accurate reports, or failing to surrender allowances by the set date, amongst others. And with that, you know, we do have powers to block trading accounts. There is an element to name and shame, but we're also recognised, you know, we are here to try and help people to comply. We're trying to provide you the products to help yourselves, and you know, there will be powers within the regulations that we will have a degree of regulator discretion. So this is my last slide, and it's just to, you know, spell out that we're already thinking about phase 2. You know, the qualification year for phase 2 is actually starts in the next financial year, April 2010 to 2011. So this is a timeline which has been previously published, and you know, it's part of the project I'm dealing with. That you know, we are starting to think through what we need to do for this next phase, because you know, we need to sort of develop the functionality for auctioning and to design the comms around it. So, as I say, you know, the CRC is going to be here very shortly, and you know, we're doing what we can to help people to understand their obligations under the scheme. So, thank you.